Hello students, today we will be discussing the topic electoral process in India. We all know that India is a constitutional democracy with a parliamentary form of government. At the heart of such a government lies the commitment to hold regular, free and fair elections to elect our representatives. The framers of the constitution provided for universal adult franchise in order to empower the citizens to elect their own representatives. Thereby, we have elections to the different offices of the government. The importance of elections was well deliberated in the Constituent Assembly, and that is the reason why we have a separate part 15 of the Constitution which focuses on elections. In order to facilitate a better understanding of this topic, students, I have divided the entire lecture into a number of subparts. We would start off with the features and trends of the Indian election system. Then we would move on to the constitutional and legal safeguards for elections, and finally we would focus on the exact electoral process through which we elect our representatives. Let us start off with the features of Indian election system. If you look into the elections to the different offices, the elections can be divided into direct elections and indirect elections. Direct elections are held to the legislatures, that is the Lok Sabha, as well as the Vidhan Sabha, as well as to local self-government organizations. That means we have directly elected representatives and we elect our MPs to the Lok Sabha, the MLAs to the Vidhan Sabha, as well as representatives to the panchayats and municipalities. Then we have indirect elections to some offices. For example, the office of the President, the Vice President, Rajya Sabha, as well as the Vidhan Parishads in some states have indirect elections. In the case of indirect elections, the general citizenry do not participate, but there is an electoral college which facilitate the electing the offices of the President as well as the Vice President. Now, after studying the direct and the indirect elections, let us try to understand what does the Constitution say about the creation of constituencies and how are people represented in the country. In order to facilitate democratic processes, the entire country is divided into constituencies and one representative is elected from each constituency. However, we need to know that the constituencies for the Lok Sabha as well as for the Vidhan Sabha or state legislatures in the country are different. So, what we know is that there is the simple majority system through which the representatives are elected. Most importantly, India follows the system of first past the poll system, where the candidate who wins the highest number of votes is declared elected from that particular constituency. Now, another important part of electoral system is that we have the system of reservation of seats, which means that in order to give effective representation to certain communities, the Constitution has provided for reservation of seats for the scheduled caste as well as the scheduled tribes. Article 330 provides for reservation to the Lok Sabha for the scheduled caste and the scheduled tribes, and Article 332 provides for a similar provision to the state legislative assemblies. Earlier, we also had the system of 2 persons from the Anglo-Indian community being nominated to the Lok Sabha. However, in 2019, there has been a change in the provision. By virtue of the 104th Constitution Amendment Act of 2019, this nomination-based representation of the Anglo-Indian community has been removed from 2019 onwards, and they have emerged with the general community. However, students, please remember that we have 12 members nominated to the Rajya Sabha by the President from amongst people who have excelled in the field of art, science, literature, etc. Coming to reservation at the local level, we have 33% reservation for women at the local institutions, and thereby these institutions we have representation of women in the panchayats as well as in the rural and urban local self-government units. Let us now start off with the constitutional and legal safeguards of elections, where we will be studying the constitutional provisions and the laws pertaining to elections in India. Article 324 of the Indian Constitution provides that the power of superintendence, direction and control of elections to the Parliament, state legislatures, President and Vice President shall be vested in the Election Commission of India. Article 325 provides for a common electoral roll for all Indian citizens irrespective of differences in religion, caste, sex and the like. Article 326 provides for elections to the Lok Sabha, Vidhan Sabha to be held in accordance with universal adult suffrage, which means that all citizens of the age of 18 and above shall be eligible to cast votes to the different elections in the country. Article 327 provides the power to the Parliament to make laws pertaining to elections. Article 328 provides a similar power to the state legislatures. And finally, we have Article 329 which bars the courts from interfering in election matters. Next come to the laws pertaining to elections. We have two very important legislative provisions and two very important laws pertaining to elections. They are the Representation of Peoples Act 1950 and Representation of Peoples Act 1951. The Representation of Peoples Act 1950 provides for allocation of seats and determination of constituencies for the purpose of elections to the Lok Sabha and the Vidhan Sabha, including qualifications of voters and preparation of electoral rolls. The Representation of Peoples Act 1951 provides for actual conduct of elections, qualifications for members of the Parliament and the state legislatures, as well as electoral malpractices and offences. Now, the body which conducts elections for the entire country is the Election Commission. With a view to ensuring free and fair elections, the Constitution provides for certain members to the Election Commission and certain roles and responsibilities to be given to them. For example, Article 324 vests the superintendence, direction and control of the preparation of electoral rolls and the conduct of elections to the Houses of Parliament and state legislative assemblies, as well as to the offices of the President and Vice President, to an independent election commission. Now, this election commission consists of one chief election commissioner and two other election commissioners to oversee the conduct of elections. However, it should be noted that the three election commissioners enjoy co-equal position under the Constitution. In order to understand the entire Indian electoral process, we need to know the steps through which the Indian elections go through. Now, it's an enigma to the entire world that how does the world's largest democracy conduct its elections, where we have widespread illiteracy, underdevelopment, economic disparities. Over the years, we have developed a very efficient electoral machinery, and the entire election is conducted to 10 steps. The 10 steps are: number 1, it starts with the process of delimitation of constituencies. Second, we move on to preparation of electoral rolls. Thirdly, notification of elections and appointment of returning officers. Fourthly, we move on how the nomination papers should be filed. Next, we move on to the scrutiny of nomination papers. Step 6 is about withdrawal of nominations. Step 7 is about the entire process of election campaigns. Then we move on to step 8, which is polling of votes. Step 9 is counting of votes and declaration of results. And step 10 is settlement of electoral disputes, if any. Now, these are the broad 10 steps through which our entire election system is conducted. Now, let us move on a little deep into how this entire system works. Now, we need to understand that with population increasing, how are these constituencies demarcated? Demarcation of constituencies is the task of the Delimitation Commission. Delimitation is the redrawing of the boundaries of parliamentary or assembly constituencies to make sure that there are, as near as practicable, the same number of people in each constituency. In India, boundaries are meant to be examined after a 10-yearly census to reflect changes in population, for which Parliament by law establishes a delimitation commission made up of the Chief Election Commissioner and 2 sitting or retired judges of the Supreme Court or High Court. Now, after the constituencies are delimited, begins the process of scheduling elections. The Election Commission schedules elections in a major press conference a few weeks before the formal process is set into motion. Immediately after the declaration of election dates, the Model Code of Conduct comes into place, which speaks about the do's and don'ts for the political parties as well as the candidates. Then we have the notification going out for the filing of nomination papers. After the notification is issued, candidates starts filing their nomination papers. Now, we need to understand that at the time of filing of nomination papers, each candidate has to present certain details concerning their educational qualifications, their financial assets as well as criminal antecedents, if any, to make the voters aware about their prospective candidates. Then we have the process of scrutinizing the nomination papers filed by the candidates by the returning officers, and after that the rejections can happen if the information is found to be incorrect. Contesting candidates who have filed their nomination papers get at least 2 weeks for political campaigning before the actual date of polling. Now, on account of the vast magnitude of electoral operations and the massive size of the Indian electorate, polling is held at least on 3 to 4 days in the Indian elections. In the last elections, we found that the polling was held in different phases. A separate date for counting is fixed and the results are declared constituency wise. Now, the Commission compiles the list of all the members who are elected and then declares the result. With this, the process of elections is complete, and the President in case of the Lok Sabha and the governors of the state concerned in the case of the Vidhan Sabha can then convene their respective houses to hold their sessions. The entire process takes to around 5 to 8 weeks for the national elections and the 4 to 5 weeks for elections to the state legislature. The next important question: who can vote for the Lok Sabha elections and the Vidhan Sabha elections? The democratic system in India is based on the principle of universal adult suffrage, wherein citizens who have attained the age of 18 years can vote for elections. However, please note that before 1989, the age of voting, the minimum age of voting was 21 years. After that, it has been changed to 18 years. The right to vote is given to all, irrespective of caste, creed, religion or gender. However, those of the citizens who are of unsound mind and people convicted of certain criminal offences are debarred from voting. Another important thing in India is the preparation of the electoral roll, which is a major exercise for the Election Commission. Unlike in other democracies where the task of preparation of electoral roll is given to the legislatures, in India it is the task of the Independent Election Commission to prepare the electoral roll so that there is no bias or exclusion in the preparation. The Election Commission sends official enumerators from house to house to collect data about eligible voters, on the basis of which the electoral rolls are prepared and suitably revised from time to time. If someone is eligible to vote and is not on the electoral roll, he can apply to the electoral registration officer of the constituency, which will update the register. Now, we need to understand that when do elections take place? We all know that the Lok Sabha and the Vidhan Sabha have a 5-year tenure. So, elections should be held either immediately after the dissolution of the Lok Sabha and the Vidhan Sabha after completion of the 5 years, and it is said that within a period of 6 months after the dissolution of the Lok Sabha and the Vidhan Sabha, elections should be held. But we also have a condition where the President can dissolve the Lok Sabha and call a general election before 5 years if the government can no longer command an absolute majority in either the Lok Sabha or the Vidhan Sabha. By-elections. Now, if an elected member of the parliament or the state legislature dies or resigns or there is a vacation of the seat, then a by-election will be held for that particular constituency and it will be conducted in the same manner as a general election. However, please note students that the by-election is normally held within 6 months of the occurrence of the vacancy. However, no by-election is held where the vacancy is for less than 1 year. Scheduling of elections, which is a very important part of the electoral process. When the 5-year period is up, the legislature's elections are due. The Election Commission puts into effect the machinery for conduct of elections. The Constitution states that there can be no longer than 6 months interval between the last session of the dissolved Lok Sabha and the recalling of the new House, so that the elections have to be concluded before that. Now, who can contest elections to the various offices? In the case of the Lok Sabha, a candidate has to be a citizen of India and should not be less than 25 years of age. For the Rajya Sabha and the Vidhan Parishad, the age limit is 30 years. However, Section 3 of the Representation of Peoples Act 1951 originally provided that the qualification for Rajya Sabha candidate to be a candidate to the Rajya Sabha, he or she should be an elector of the parliamentary constituency of the state. But please note, this particular provision has been amended in 2003, so much so that any person can contest elections to the Rajya Sabha and he need not be a resident of the state from which he is contesting the elections to the Rajya Sabha. Which also signifies the fact that though we know Rajya Sabha is a representation of the states, here we find that by virtue of the 2003 amendment, now the Rajya Sabha MPs no longer are obliged to be representatives of the state from which they have been elected. They may be residents of some other state. Now, every candidate, there are some procedural formalities that has to be completed when a candidate is filing elections. Every candidate has to make a deposit of 10,000 for the Lok Sabha elections and 5,000 for Rajya Sabha or Vidhan Parishad elections, except for candidates from the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe who pay half of these amounts. Now, the deposit is returned to the candidate after the election results are declared if the candidate receives 1/6 of the total number of valid votes polled in that constituency. Candidates who receive less than 1/6 of the valid votes, their security deposit is forfeited. Nominations for Lok Sabha and Vidhan Sabha must be supported at least one registered elector of the constituency from where he or she is filing elections, in the case of a candidate sponsored by a registered party, and by 10 registered electors from the constituency in the case of other candidates, I mean independent candidates. Returning officers appointed by the Election Commission are put in charge to receive nominations of candidates in each constituency and oversee the entire formalities of elections. Now, an important part of the electoral process is filing nominations and at the same time withdrawal of nominations. We also hear a large number of candidates filing, but at the last moment withdrawing their nominations. Under the Indian electoral laws, 8 days, including the date of which the electoral notification is issued, the candidates get time to file their nominations from a particular constituency. Scrutiny of nomination normally takes place on the day following the last date for making nominations. Thereafter, 2 days are given within which candidates can withdraw their nomination papers. After the election dates are declared and after the procedure has been formalized, enters the task of keeping the model code of conduct in place. The Election Commission draws up a list of do's and don'ts that the parties, the candidates have to follow in order to ensure the elections are really free and fair. The model code of conduct are basically broad guidelines as to how the political parties and candidates should conduct themselves during the Election Commission. Now, the purpose of the model code of conduct is intended to maintain the election campaign on healthy lines, avoid clashes and conflicts between political parties and the supporters, and to ensure peace and stability during the election campaign. The model code of conduct prescribes guidelines for the ruling party either at the center or in the state to ensure that at least a level playing field is provided to both the contesting candidates from the majority party as well as from other political parties. The election campaign is a very interesting part of this entire electoral process, whereby political parties release manifestos, provide speeches and try to lure and tempt the voters in order to vote for that particular political party and the candidate. once an election has been called, parties issue different kinds of manifestos detailing the programs they wish to implement if they come to power. Slogans are used to popularize and identify parties and issues. Pamphlets, posters adorn the constituency, favoring the different candidates who are contesting the elections. Coming back to the Model Code of Conduct, because this is the most important part stressed by the Election Commission to be followed by the political parties as well as the candidates, because it has been observed that a number of cases have been filed for violation of the Model Code of Conduct, and the Election Commission has been taking stern action against those violating the Model Code of Conduct. Now, it has been exercised that the Model Code of Conduct is to be followed sternly by every person involved in the electoral process. It was also intended to ensure that the Election Commission is also not biased in favor of any political party and ensures that the Model Code of Conduct comes into play in a very disciplined manner. Now, we can't have elections in India without political parties, and given the fact that we are a multi-party country, political parties prepare themselves well for the elections to the Lok Sabha as well as the Vidhan Sabha, not to speak of the gaining popularity of political parties at the local level elections. Now, political parties and candidates play a major role in influencing the voters about who they should cast their votes for. Parties offer candidates or organizational support to the candidates who have filed their nomination papers, and also offer a broad election campaign looking at the record of the government and putting forward alternative proposals for the government, helping voters make a choice how the government is to be run. Now, although political parties were not mentioned in the original constitution, but the fact that parliamentary government is a party government has made Indian parties very popular before the electorate. Political parties are an important institution in India, both at the center, state as well as the local level. Now, the parties offer candidates a number of help also, in the sense that if a party is unable to fulfill the role of a government party by not being able to win majority seats, then in a parliamentary form of government, the second party holding majority seats will become the opposition. Now, opposition also has a very important role to play in a parliamentary democracy, because the task of the opposition is not simply to oppose the policies of the ruling government, but also to provide alternative action plan if the ruling party fails to provide relief in terms of proper friendly governmental policies. Now, herein, when we have elections and when the mass of electorate is involved, where a large proportion of the population is illiterate, election symbols play a major role. So, here in India, political parties are also known by the symbols allotted by the Election Commission. Now, integral to this election process in India is the use of electoral symbols to identify a political party and its candidates at the time of elections. As the Supreme Court of India noted in one of the landmark judgments, where it said that there is need for using symbols to denote the candidates who contest elections, so that an illiterate voter may cast his vote in secrecy in favor of the candidate of the choice by identifying him with the help of symbols printed on the EVM machine against the name. In 1968, after gaining experience over 4 general elections, the Election Commission considered to designate and to codify the provisions relating to recognition of political parties as national party, state party, registered and non-registered political parties. Now, what we find is in India is that the Election Commission clearly states certain rules and certain provisions how to identify a party as a national party, as a state party, as a recognized party, and as well as a unrecognized and non-recognized political party. Now, besides political parties contesting elections, we also see a large number of independent candidates contesting elections. However, we should understand that there are certain modalities to be observed at the time of this entire electoral process that I have just described. The Election Commission appoints a large number of people as observers, these election observers are sent to different constituencies in order to report about the conduct of polls, election campaigns to the Election Commission. The observers are also entitled to ensure that people are given a free and a fair system of voting. Now, these observers also keep a special check on the amount that each political party spends on elections. Please note, students, under the Code of Conduct, the Election Commission has released limits to poll expenses to prevent unnecessary usage of election funds and election money into the electoral process. Counting of votes, which is again a very crucial part of Indian elections. After the polling has finished, the votes are counted under the supervision of returning officers and observers appointed specially by the Election Commission. After the counting of votes is over, the returning officer declares the names of the candidate to whom the largest number of votes have been given as the winner and have been returned by the constituency to the concerned house as the representative of the constituency to the Lok Sabha in the Lok Sabha elections or to the Vidhan Sabha in the case of Vidhan Sabha elections. The last part of our discussion is about electoral petitions. After elections are over, disputes may arise between candidates and candidates who have lost elections. Any elector or candidate can file an election petition if he or she thinks that there has been malpractice during the election. An election petition is not an ordinary civil suit but should be treated as a contest in which the whole constituency is involved. Election petitions are tried by the High Court of the state involved and if upheld can lead to the restating of elections in that constituency. That means re-elections can be ordered by the Election Commission if the dispute is found to be valid one. The election petition can be filed within 45 days of the declaration of the result. Appeals from the orders of the High Court lie to the Supreme Court of India. Let us conclude what we have studied today. Elections are the foundation of Indian democracy and it is the duty of the Election Commission to conduct free, fair and regular elections to the different offices of the government. The Election Commission plays a fundamental role in conducting elections and over the years the Election Commission has been able to create a structured and a well-functioning electoral machinery and has earned the confidence of the population in ensuring transparency in the election system. The fact that detailed provisions have been made in the Constitution regarding elections and election practices shows how anxious the framers had been to safeguard the political right to vote to the citizens. Thus, the importance of elections and the electoral process cannot be undermined in the largest democracy of the world. Thank you.